This story is fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The receipt was so thin, I almost threw it away. I remember the exact moment because I was standing under a string of amber lights, watching strangers clap for a story they didn't understand. The room looked like a celebration, wine glasses catching the glow, plates of appetizers floating by on trays, my mother's laugh rising like music. But I couldn't hear the laughter the way other people did. All I heard was paper. That pale strip in my pocket, folded twice, edges softened by sweat and doubt. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like a nerve, exposed, tender, impossible to ignore. My brother Caleb stood near the little stage we built out of 2 borrowed risers. His smile was confident, practiced, the kind of smile that made people want to believe him. And next to him was Vanessa, his wife, shining in a way that made cameras love her. She looked like she belonged in every frame. I stood off to the side, where the shadows were polite and no one asked what I was thinking. Across the room, Nina Park, our accountant, stood alone at a cocktail table, watching everything like a person who'd learned that silence could be a weapon. When our eyes met, she didn't wave. She just nodded once. Now, my throat tightened as if the building itself had decided to swallow me. Because once you speak the truth out loud, you don't get to put it back. And in my family, the truth had always been something we kept in the kitchen, never served to guests. Caleb tapped the microphone like he was checking the pulse of the room. "Thank you all for being here," he said, voice warm with a hint of emotion he could turn on like a light. "This restaurant, it's more than food. It's family, it's history, it's home." Applause rolled over the tables, and I hated myself for the thought that rose up in me. Quiet, ugly, honest. They're clapping for you, not for us. My mother, Mari, moved between guests in her apron like she couldn't stop working, even when the night was meant to honor her. She touched shoulders, listened to stories, apologized for things that weren't her fault. People loved her. They always had. My father sat near the side, hands folded, face softer than it used to be. He looked smaller, like time had taken a bite out of him, and kept chewing. Vanessa watched Caleb speak and smiled at all the right moments, as if she were editing reality in real time. I kept one hand in my pocket, the paper pressed into my palm like it was trying to become part of me. I told myself I would wait for the right moment, wait for the room to be ready. But then I realized something. The room would never be ready. It would always be easier for them to clap, to donate, to leave, to forget. The only thing that would change that was a voice that refused to soften. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could keep mine quiet. 72 hours earlier, the restaurant smelled like onions and hope. Not the glossy kind of hope you put on a poster. The working kind. Hot oil, chopped herbs, dish soap, the sharp sweetness of lemons. The kind of hope that lives in routines, because routines are what you cling when you can't afford miracles. I unlocked the front door, and the bell chimed the same way it always had, like it didn't know the world could change. My mother was already there, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. "Hey, Mijo," she said without looking up. "Can you check the faucet? It's doing that thing again." Everything was doing that thing again. The fridge made a noise like it was trying to warn us. The register froze if you hit the wrong button. The supplier text had started sounding less friendly and more official. I crouched under the sink, wrench in hand, water dripping down my wrist. That was my role in the family, quiet repairs, uncredited fixes. I didn't mind being useful. What I minded was being predictable. I finished the job, wiped my hands, and walked toward the back office to grab a roll of receipt paper. The shelves were cluttered with old ledgers, dusty, forgotten, shoved back like embarrassing memories. One ledger sat slightly out of line, as if someone had pulled it out recently and pushed it back in a hurry. I reached for it, and the weight felt wrong. Paper shouldn't feel like a secret. I opened the ledger expecting grease-stained invoices and scribbled notes. Instead, I found the thin slip of paper tucked between pages like it was hiding. The ink was faint, almost ghostly, like a printer dying mid-confession. One word stood out clearly enough to change my breathing. Collateral. I stared at it as if staring could make it mean something else. Collateral was a word I associated with banks, not families. It didn't belong next to my mother's handwriting and our vendor receipts and the story of how my parents built this place from nothing. I unfolded the paper carefully. There were numbers, dates, a property description. This building, our building. I felt a cold line draw itself through my chest. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Something normal, something temporary, something I was misreading. But the deeper I looked, the more my stomach tightened. Alone, secured by the restaurant. A promise made to someone outside our family, backed by the thing inside our family that mattered most. I folded the paper again, slower this time, like speed would make it real. From the kitchen, my mother called out, "Ethan, table 6 needs extra bread." I held the thin receipt in my hand and realized the scariest part. My mother didn't sound like someone who was hiding a secret. She sounded like someone who'd been carrying it for so long she forgot what it felt like to set it down. I brought the bread, I smiled, I refilled water glasses. That's what I did when something in my life started to shake. I became extra good at the small things. If the world was going to fall apart, at least the tables would be clean. But inside, my thoughts moved like a trapped animal. Collateral. Loan. Why? My brother, Caleb, breezed in mid-rush, dressed like he'd been somewhere more important. He kissed my mother on the cheek, winked at a regular customer, and said, "How we doing? Mom, you good?" Mari nodded, too busy to ask him where he'd been. Caleb's eyes slid past me like I was part of the furniture. I told myself not to be petty. Caleb had always been like that. Firstborn confidence, firstborn gravity. People orbited him without realizing they were doing it. Vanessa arrived soon after, heels clicking with purpose. She held a folder and a phone, and the kind of smile that looked expensive. "We need to talk fundraiser," she announced, as if the word itself could solve our problems. My mother's shoulders lifted, just a little, like she was bracing for impact. I watched them gather near the front, heads close together, planning the night that would supposedly save us. And I thought about the thin receipt in my pocket. Maybe the fundraiser wasn't about saving us. Maybe it was about making sure no one noticed we were already drowning. I called the bank from the alley because I didn't want the walls inside the restaurant to hear me. The sun was bright, and it made everything feel unfair, like the day had no right to be normal while my mind was splitting in two. A woman answered with a voice trained to sound kind. I gave the address. I gave the account name. I tried to sound like someone who belonged in this conversation. There was a pause, keyboard clicks, then a gentle tone that people use when they're about to tell you something you'll never forget. "Yes," she said, "the property is listed as collateral on an active loan. Active, not passed, not resolved, not handled. Active." My mouth went dry. "Who signed?" "I'm not able to disclose." "I'm family," I cut in and hated the desperation in my voice. A longer pause. "I can confirm the signature matches an authorized party on file." Authorized party. I thanked her and hung up, because if I stayed on the phone 1 second longer, I might say something I couldn't undo. The alley smelled like oil and old rain. I stared at the brick wall like it might explain why my family had done this without telling me. Then I realized something that made my chest hurt more than the loan. They didn't tell me because it didn't occur to them that I needed to know. That night, I tried to ask my mother casually. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter, pretending my heartbeat wasn't loud enough to hear. "Did you ever take out a loan against the restaurant?" Her knife didn't stop moving. Chop, 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 a rhythm of avoidance. "What kind of question is that?" she said lightly, too lightly. "You worry too much." "I'm not trying to worry," I said. "I just found paperwork." Mari finally looked up, and for a moment her eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Tired like someone who'd been holding their breath for months. Then she smiled again. The smile snapped back into place. "We're fine," she said. "We're always fine." That sentence hit me like a memory. When I was 13 and Caleb got in trouble, we were fine. When my father's blood pressure scared us, we were fine. When bills piled up, we were fine. Fine meant, don't ask. Fine meant, carry it alone. I wanted to press harder, but my mother turned back to her cutting board. End of conversation, and I realized how my family survived. Not by solving problems, by stepping around them carefully until the floor disappeared. I found Nina after closing when the restaurant was quiet enough to hear truth breathe. She sat in the office with a desk lamp and a spreadsheet open, her face calm in the way calm people get when they've already seen the worst part coming. "You look like you swallowed a storm," she said without looking up. I held up the thin receipt. Nina's eyes flicked to it, then back to my face. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like confirmation. "So you found it," she said. "You knew?" "I suspected," she corrected. "There are gaps, transfers that don't line up, things that move like they're trying not to be seen." I sat down hard, the chair squeaking like it was protesting. "Why didn't you tell us?" Nina's laugh was small, humorless. "I tried. Your brother told me to stay in my lane. Your sister said not to stress your mom, and your dad." She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "Your dad looked at me like he wanted to disappear." I stared at the paper again. All that time, Nina had been holding the shape of the truth alone, just like me. And suddenly, teaming up didn't feel like revenge. It felt like survival. The next day, I confronted Caleb and Vanessa near the front counter while my mother was busy in the kitchen. I kept my voice low. "I found loan paperwork." Caleb's face tightened, then relaxed into offense. "Why are you digging through old stuff?" "It's not old," I said. "It's active." Vanessa's smile arrived fast, too fast, like she'd rehearsed what to do with discomfort. "Ethan," she said gently, "we're in the middle of a big week. Maybe this isn't the time." "That's exactly why it's the time," I replied. Caleb leaned in. "You always do this. You find a way to make everything heavier." I almost laughed because the words were familiar, not just from Caleb, from my whole life. Don't be dramatic. Don't ruin the mood. Don't ask questions that make people uncomfortable. Vanessa touched Caleb's arm like she was calming a child. Her eyes stayed on me. "We're handling it," she said. "The fundraiser will help." "How?" I asked. If the building is collateral, what exactly are we saving?" Vanessa's gaze sharpened, just for a second. Then her smile returned. "We're saving the story," she said softly, like she didn't realize she'd said the quiet part out loud. Late that night, I dug through a drawer in my parents' house where old documents slept under rubber bands. Birth certificates, old lease papers, a yellowed recipe my mother wrote when she first opened the place. I laid everything out like a detective in a movie I didn't want to be in. Then I compared the signature. The loan document's signature wasn't my father's. It wasn't Caleb's. It matched my mother's handwriting, the loop of the M, the way the I leaned like it was tired. My chest went hot and cold at the same time. My mother, the one who kissed scraped knees and packed lunches and built this restaurant with her hands, had signed the restaurant away without telling me. I sat back, staring at the paper until the letters blurred. I wanted to be angry, but anger didn't fit. What I felt was worse, grief. Because it meant she hadn't trusted me, or maybe she trusted me too much. Trusted I would keep being fine. I heard her voice in my head, "We're always fine." And for the first time I thought, maybe fine was how she kept herself from breaking. Maybe she was already broken, and I didn't know whether exposing the truth would save her or finish the job. Nina and I started meeting before sunrise. We didn't call it an investigation. That word sounded too dramatic for a family that treated drama like poison. We called it sorting paperwork, but it was an investigation. Nina pulled statements, invoices, transaction logs. She didn't gossip. She didn't guess. She followed patterns the way some people follow religion. I watched her work and realized something strange. Nina wasn't emotional about the money. She was emotional about the disrespect. "These transfers," she said, tapping a line on the screen, "are structured, small enough not to trigger attention, regular enough to be intentional." "Where do they go?" I asked. Nina's jaw tightened. "An entity with a clean name, like it was designed to look harmless." She printed a page and slid it to me. The name meant nothing, but the feeling in my gut meant everything. "What are we looking at?" I whispered. Nina didn't answer right away. She looked at me the way adults look at someone before they tell them life isn't fair. "We're looking," she said, "at someone who thinks the restaurant is a resource, not a home." I stared at the paper, and I thought about Vanessa's polished smile, about Caleb's casual entitlement, and about my mother signing something she didn't want to sign. The deeper we went, the more I understood. This wasn't one bad decision. It was a system. The confrontation happened at the kitchen table like most real family disasters do. Without music, without warning, with a plate of food nobody eats. My mother sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. My father's eyes kept drifting to the window as if he could climb out of it. Caleb arrived late, annoyed like we'd interrupted his life. Vanessa came with him, calm, polished, prepared. I placed the thin receipt on the table. My voice shook. "Tell me what this is." Mari's face tightened, Ray's shoulders sank. And finally, my mother whispered, "It was supposed to be temporary." Temporary. The word people use when they want to turn a mistake into weather. "We had a bad season," she said. I laughed once and it sounded wrong in my own ears. "We've had bad seasons for years." My father's voice was quiet. "We didn't want you kids to worry." "I'm not a kid," I said, heat rising. "I'm here every day. I fix things. I cover shifts. I keep this place alive. And you didn't think I deserved to know the truth?" Mari flinched like I'd slapped her with a sentence. Vanessa leaned in, voice soft like a blanket over a wound. "We can talk about feelings later. Right now, we need to focus on the fundraiser." I stared at her, and it hit me with sudden clarity. They weren't afraid of losing the restaurant. They were afraid of losing control of the narrative. After the kitchen table confession, the house felt too small for my thoughts. I stepped outside, breathing cold air like it could reset me. On the restaurant window, a glossy poster announced the fundraiser with cheerful fonts and smiling photos. Vanessa had designed it. She'd chosen a picture where Caleb stood front and center, arm around my mother like a hero in a family movie. I was in the photo too, half a shoulder, a hint of a smile, a background character in my own life. I should have been grateful to be included. Instead, something in me hardened, not into cruelty, into clarity. If the restaurant was pledged as collateral, the fundraiser wasn't just a night of community support. It was a distraction, a beautiful one, wrapped in hope and hors d'oeuvres. And if there were transfers Nina couldn't explain, someone was using the restaurant like a credit card. That meant the problem wasn't only financial, it was moral. I heard laughter from inside. The staff joked as they cleaned. Life kept moving, but I couldn't, because the truth had moved into my pocket and it was getting heavier by the hour. My sister Sophia caught me pacing later that night. She always noticed things. She was the only one who didn't treat emotional weather like an inconvenience. "You're spiraling," she said gently. "I'm not spiraling," I lied. She leaned on the wall and studied me. "You found something worse than what they admitted." I didn't answer. My silence answered for me. Sophia exhaled. "Ethan, if you blow this up, you blow up Mom." "And if I don't," I said, voice tight, "they lose the restaurant anyway. They just lose it quietly." Sophia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Caleb will hate you." I shrugged like it didn't matter, but it mattered more than I wanted to admit. Because Caleb wasn't just my brother. He was the scoreboard my family kept without saying it out loud. His success was proof my parents hadn't struggled for nothing, and I was... what? The reliable one, the helpful one, the one who didn't cause problems. Sophia stepped closer. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at my hands, imagining the thin receipt. "I don't know," I said. But even as I said it, I felt the truth forming inside me like a decision. And decisions once made don't care who they hurt. Vanessa started being nice to me after that. Not real nice. Performative nice. She posted photos of family unity, tagged the restaurant, wrote captions about resilience. She praised my work in front of donors. Loud enough for people to hear, warm enough to make me look ungrateful if I didn't smile back. It was smart. If I pushed against her, I would look like the problem. She caught me near the kitchen and said, "You've been so helpful, Ethan. We couldn't do this without you." The words should have felt good. Instead, they felt like handcuffs made of compliments. I realized that Vanessa didn't just manage money. She managed perception. And perception is a kind of power that doesn't show up in spreadsheets, but it can destroy you all the same. Later, Nina handed me another printed page. "This is why she's being nice," Nina said quietly. I stared at the line items. More transfers, more quiet bleeding. Nina's voice was calm. "If you want it to stop, you'll have to make it visible." I swallowed hard. "At the fundraiser." Nina didn't smile. "At the fundraiser." And suddenly, the night Caleb called a celebration felt like something else entirely. A courtroom. Nina built a timeline the way my mother built sauces, slowly, patiently, with an attention that felt like love. She didn't accuse, she connected. This payment to that invoice to this vendor to a consulting account that wasn't actually consulting anything. "People think money is complicated," Nina said, tapping the paper with a pen. "It's not. It's just choices with decimals." I watched her highlight a set of small transfers. "These are spaced, intentional, like footsteps. "Who's making them?" I asked. Nina met my eyes. "Someone with access, someone who knows where no one looks." My mind jumped to Caleb because that was the easy answer. But easy answers were what my family survived on. I didn't want easy. I wanted true. "Could it be Mom?" I asked, hating myself for saying it. Nina's expression softened in a way that surprised me. "Your mom signed the collateral paperwork," she said. "That doesn't mean she understands what's happening now." I stared at the timeline. It felt like looking at a map of a city I'd lived in my whole life, only to realize there were tunnels under the streets, tunnels someone else had been using while I served bread and smiled. Nina slid the final page toward me. At the top, she'd written neatly, "Transfers and liabilities, sequence of events." It didn't look like revenge. It looked like reality, cleaned up enough to be undeniable. Caleb cornered me by the walk-in fridge like we were teenagers again. The fluorescent light made his face look sharper. "You're acting weird," he said. "You're making everyone tense." "I'm tense," I replied, "because the building is on the line." Caleb scoffed. "We're handling it," that phrase again. "We." The royal we that meant me and Vanessa, not me, not Sophia, not even our parents sometimes. "What exactly are you handling?" I asked. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You don't trust us." I almost laughed. "You didn't tell me." Caleb leaned closer, voice low. "Because you freak out. You always freak out." I stared at him. My heart pounded with a familiar helplessness. This was the family pattern. If I named a problem, I became the problem. And I was so tired of wearing that mask. "I'm not freaking out," I said. "I'm waking up." Caleb's jaw flexed. "Don't do anything stupid at the fundraiser." The threat was gentle, but the meaning was sharp. "Don't embarrass us. Don't ruin the story. Stay in your place." Caleb walked away like he'd won. But something in me had already moved past him. Because when you've spent your whole life being ignored, you learn the one thing that scares powerful people most: being seen. I found my parents later in the kitchen. The house was quiet. The sink ran. My mother washed dishes that were already clean because work was her safe place. My father sat at the table, one hand resting over his chest like he was listening to his own heartbeat. I hated that the truth could hurt him. I hated even more that silence had hurt him first. "Dad," I said gently, "how long have you known?" He looked up slowly. "Long enough," he admitted. "And you didn't stop it." His eyes filled with something older than regret, fear mixed with shame. "I tried," he whispered. "But when your mother panics, she gets determined. And Caleb..." He stopped, as if saying my brother's name out loud might make the problem bigger. My mother's hands paused in the sink. "I did what I had to," she said without turning around. I waited for her to face me. She didn't. "I know you think you're protecting us," I said, voice breaking, "but you're protecting a secret that's killing the restaurant." Mari finally turned. Her eyes were wet, and for a second she looked like the woman before the apron, before the restaurant, before the pride. "I didn't want you to carry this," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "You already made me carry it. You just didn't tell me what it was." And in that moment, I saw it. Love and secrecy tangled together until neither could breathe. The night before the fundraiser, Nina and I printed everything. The printer hummed like a nervous animal. Each page that slid out felt like a step closer to a cliff. "Once this is public," I said, "there's no going back." Nina didn't look up. There was no going back the moment they signed the building away. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because part of me still hoped for a softer ending. A family conversation, a quiet fix, a restored trust. But my family didn't do quiet fixes. They did quiet wounds. Nina stacked the papers into a folder, clean, labeled, almost boring. That was the point. Drama could be dismissed. Evidence couldn't. She handed me the folder like she was handing me a mirror. "You're gonna feel like the villain," she warned. "I already do," I admitted. Nina's expression softened. That's how families keep secrets. They make the truth teller feel cruel. I stared at the folder. For most of my life, I'd been the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who made it easier for everyone else to pretend. This time, I was about to make it harder. And somehow that felt like love too. The day of the fundraiser, Vanessa moved through the restaurant like a general. "Those centerpieces go there. Adjust the lighting. Make sure the banner is visible in every shot." She turned our dining room into a set. Caleb rehearsed his speech twice, voice thick with just the right amount of emotion. My mother nodded along, eyes distant. My father sat quietly, as if saving his strength for surviving the night. I watched my family become performers, and the bitterness in me rose like a tide. Not because they were pretending, because they were pretending so well. Sophia found me by the back door. She looked pale. "I saw the folder," she said. "Nina showed me." I braced for her to beg me not to do it. Instead, she took a shaky breath. "If you go up there alone, they'll eat you alive." My throat tightened. "So what are you saying?" Sophia wiped her eyes quickly, angry at her own weakness. "I'm saying, I'm standing behind you." It wasn't loud support, but in my family, quiet support was rare. It felt like a hand on my back. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was terrified because I might lose everything or because I might finally matter. Vanessa stopped me near the office like she'd been waiting. "Ethan," she said, voice sweet, "you've been distant." I forced a neutral expression. "Busy." She tilted her head. "This fundraiser is important. The community is showing up for your parents. For all of you." Her eyes held mine, and I felt the warning under the warmth. "So show up," she continued. "Smile, let your brother lead. Don't make tonight about conflicts." There it was, the gentle request that was really a boundary. I thought of the thin receipt. I thought of Nina's timeline. I thought of my mother's hands shaking in the sink. "I want to keep the restaurant," I said quietly. Vanessa smiled. "So do we." But something in her tone made my skin prickle, like she'd said the sentence for the crowd, not for me. I leaned in just slightly. "Then tell me the truth." Vanessa blinked once. "I am telling you the truth." "No," I said, voice steady now. "You're telling me a version." Her smile stayed in place, hesitates, but her eyes cooled. "You're emotional," she murmured. "That's understandable, but adults handle things quietly. Quietly, the family religion." I nodded as if I agreed. Vanessa walked away satisfied, and I realized she still didn't understand who she was dealing with. I wasn't emotional. I was done. An hour before guests arrived, Nina pulled me aside. "There's something you should know," she said. She opened her purse and showed me an old badge, a corporate ID from a bank compliance department. Her name printed under a logo I recognized. "You worked for them?" I asked. Nina nodded. "A long time ago." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Because nobody asked who I was. They only asked me to make numbers behave." I stared at the badge. "Why did you leave?" Nina's voice stayed calm, but her eyes darkened. "Because I watched families lose homes while the people responsible hosted charity events and smiled for cameras." I swallowed hard. The parallel hit like a punch. "So this is personal," I said. Nina looked at me. "It became personal when I realized your mother didn't understand what she signed, and someone used that." My chest tightened. "You're sure?" Nina nodded. "I'm sure enough to stand next to you." For a moment, the fear inside me shifted shape. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was purpose. If Nina had spent her life watching people get crushed by polished lies, then maybe this wasn't just my family's story. Maybe it was a pattern that deserved to be interrupted, even if it hurt. The first donors arrived early. Local business owners, regular customers, a small reporter from the neighborhood paper. Vanessa greeted them like royalty. Caleb shook hands like he was running for office. My mother hugged people too long, like she was trying to absorb enough love to survive what was coming. I carried a tray of drinks because I needed my hands to do something. The folder was tucked under my jacket, flat against my ribs. The microphone on the stage sat waiting, innocent. I wondered if the mic could feel the truth approaching. Sophia floated near me, quiet and watchful, as if she were afraid the floor would open. Nina stayed near the edge of the room, her posture still, her face calm. Caleb started his speech again, his practice voice, thick with gratitude. I watched the crowd smile. They thought they were saving a restaurant. They didn't know they were about to witness a family choose between illusion and reality. I felt the old instinct rise. Protect them, protect mom, protect dad, keep it quiet. Then I remembered the bank call. Active loan, collateral, time running. And I thought, silence isn't protection if it ends with the same disaster, just lonelier. My fingers tightened around the folder. The room filled with applause, and for the first time, applause sounded like thunder before a storm. Right before Caleb went on stage, I stopped him in the back hallway. His suit jacket was perfect. His smile was already loaded. "We need to talk," I said. Caleb's eyes flicked to the folder under my arm. "No, we don't." I opened the folder and showed him the timeline, just enough for him to recognize what it was. Caleb's face shifted. The confident mask cracked for a second, then his anger rushed in to fill the space. "You've been snooping," he hissed. "I've been saving the restaurant," I said. Caleb laughed. Sharp, mean. "You think you're the hero? You're just jealous." The word hit a place in me that was tender from childhood. Jealous, what people called you when they didn't want to admit you were right. "I'm not jealous," I said, voice trembling. "I'm tired." Caleb stepped closer. "If you do anything out there, I'll make sure you're not part of this business anymore." I stared at him, heart pounding. For a second, the old Ethan wanted to back down, apologize, make peace, but peace had always meant surrender. "You already decided I'm not part of it," I said quietly. "You just forgot to say it out loud." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You're gonna ruin Mom." I swallowed. "You ruined her the moment you let her sign something she didn't understand." For the first time, Caleb looked scared, not of losing the restaurant, of being seen. And that's when I knew I couldn't stop anymore. Vanessa found Caleb seconds later. She took one look at his face and knew. Her eyes snapped to me, sharp as glass. I expected her to storm over, to demand, to threaten. But Vanessa didn't fight like that. She fought like a person who understood optics. She walked to the center of the room, smiled widely, and tapped the mic. "Everyone," she said brightly, "we have a special family message tonight. Something heartfelt." Applause rose immediately. She gestured toward the stage, toward me, like she was inviting me into a trap she planned to control. For a second, my body went numb. My mind raced. If I go up there, I expose everything. If I don't, she'll spin it. She'll make me look unstable. Sophia appeared at my side, voice low. "I'm here." Nina's gaze met mine across the room, steady as a compass. Vanessa held her smile, hands open like she was giving the crowd a gift. Maybe she thought she was forcing me to behave. Maybe she thought the stage belonged to her. I stepped forward, and I realized something strange. The stage didn't belong to Vanessa. It didn't belong to Caleb. It belonged to the truth, because the truth was the only thing nobody in that room could fully control. The walk to the stage felt longer than it should have. People smiled at me as I passed, like they thought I was part of the show, like they thought I'd say something charming, something safe. My mother looked at me from the front row. Her smile trembled. My father's eyes were wide, pleading. Caleb stood off to the side, jaw tight. Vanessa watched me like a director watching an actor who might go off script. I stepped behind the microphone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I touched the folder. Paper. Ink. Facts. Nina's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't accuse. Show." I looked out at the crowd, our regulars, our neighbors, people who'd known this restaurant longer than they'd known me as an adult. "My name is Ethan Rivera," I began. Applause. Light. Warmth. I swallowed. "I know you're here because you love this place." More applause. I nodded slowly. "So do I. I grew up here. I learned math at booth 7. I learned how to work from my mom. I learned what pride looks like from my dad." My mother's eyes filled. I took a breath that felt like lifting a weight. "And that's why I can't let you donate to a story that isn't the full truth." The room quieted. Caleb's face drained. Vanessa's smile froze, and my voice for the first time didn't ask permission to exist. "I'm not here to attack anyone," I said. "I'm here to be honest, because this restaurant is at risk in a way we haven't fully shared." A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion, discomfort. I opened the folder and held up the thin receipt. "This is not a customer receipt," I explained. "It's bank paperwork. It shows the restaurant was pledged as collateral on an active loan." My mother made a small sound, half sigh, half sob. I continued, voice careful. "I found this by accident, and when I asked questions, I got told we were fine. But fine doesn't pay a loan. Fine doesn't undo a signature." I looked toward my parents. My chest ached. Then I turned back to the crowd. "We planned tonight to raise money to help the restaurant, but we also owe you transparency about what that money would actually be used for." Vanessa's voice cut in smoothly from the side. "Ethan, honey, this isn't appropriate." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply said, if it's not appropriate to tell the truth, then we've confused manners with morality. The room went still. I gestured toward Nina. Our accountant, Nina Park, helped review the financial records to understand what happened. Nina stepped forward, calm and steady. And just like that, Vanessa's world, built on perception, began to tilt. Nina didn't look angry when she spoke. That was what made her terrifying. In the last year, she said, there have been transactions that do not align with normal operating expenses. They are consistent, structured, and routed through an entity that is not documented in the restaurant's official accounting. Whispers spread like smoke. Caleb took a step forward. This is ridiculous. Nina turned her head slightly. I'm not offering opinions. I'm describing records. Vanessa laughed softly, as if the sound alone could dismiss a spreadsheet. Nina continued. There is also evidence of a second mortgage that was not disclosed in the standard bookkeeping materials available to me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes shut briefly, like he'd been punched by a number. I felt my knees go weak, even though I'd already suspected it. Hearing it out loud made it real in a different way. The crowd shifted. A phone camera rose. Someone whispered, "Second mortgage?" Vanessa's voice stayed sweet. "This is family business." I looked at her and felt something settle inside me, quiet certainty. This building, I said, is not just family business. It's community, it's livelihoods, it's everyone who works here, everyone who eats here, everyone who loves my mother's cooking. The crowd murmured again, and I realized, once the truth had air, it didn't belong to us alone anymore. I held up the page with the entity name printed at the top. This account, I said, received repeated transfers. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, barely. Caleb's face tightened like he wanted to grab the paper and tear it. My voice shook, but I kept going. At first, I thought it was theft. Simple. Easy. A villain in a story. I paused. But life is rarely that clean. Nina handed me one more page. Something newly confirmed, something she'd hesitated to share until she could prove it. I read it, and my stomach dropped. Because the transfers didn't just lead to a random account. They led to a trail connected to Caleb. Not directly. Never directly. But close enough that anyone who understood money could see what it meant. I looked at my brother. Caleb stared back like a man caught in a mirror he didn't choose. Vanessa stepped forward, voice smooth. Caleb has done nothing but try to keep this place alive. I nodded slowly. Maybe. That word, maybe, was the first crack in Vanessa's certainty. I turned back to the crowd. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, I want to tell you what this looks like from the inside. And then I did something my family never did. I spoke about shame. The missing piece wasn't greed the way people like to imagine greed. It was fear. Caleb had been carrying a private crisis, debt from a failed venture he never told us about, payments stacking, threats of exposure that would destroy the image he lived inside. And Vanessa, always thinking 3 moves ahead, had seen the restaurant as the cleanest solution, a resource everyone loved too much to question. A building my mother would die before she let go of, so they didn't steal like strangers. They borrowed against love. They moved money quietly, dressed it up, made it look like normal business. And my mother, already exhausted, already terrified of losing everything, signed what they put in front of her because she trusted her son, because mothers do that, even when it costs them. I looked at Caleb and felt the complicated truth rise in me, anger braided with sadness. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who couldn't stand being seen as anything less than perfect. And that need for perfection had put our whole family on the edge of losing the only thing that ever made us feel whole. Vanessa's expression hardened for the first time, because now the story wasn't misunderstanding. Now the story had a spine. The room broke into voices. Some people looked furious. Some looked heartbroken. Some looked like they wanted to vanish so they wouldn't have to witness a family falling apart in public. My mother stood slowly, hands shaking. "Mio," she whispered, voice small. "Why here?" The question hit me like a blade, because I didn't want to do this here. I wanted to do this in a living room with tissues and quiet and forgiveness. But forgiveness was a luxury we didn't have time to buy. I stepped down from the stage and walked to her, still holding the thin receipt like it was a fragile thing. Because every time I tried to talk at home, I said softly, we called it drama. We called it stress. We called it not the right time. I looked at her eyes, so tired, so loving, so hurt. And Mom, there is no right time to admit we're drowning. She cried then, silently, shoulders trembling. Caleb's voice cracked. "I didn't want you to know." I turned toward him. "You didn't want anyone to know." Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but Nina's calm presence made the room feel different. Less like gossip, more like accountability. I faced the crowd again, voice steady. This fundraiser was meant to save a building, I said. I'm here to save the people inside it. And for the first time all night, the applause didn't come. What came instead was something heavier. Reality. The crowd eventually left, one by one, like a tide pulling back after revealing what it dragged in. My mother sat in the kitchen long after the last guest was gone, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. My father took his blood pressure medication and didn't speak. Sophia cleaned in silence, wiping down tables that were already clean, copying our mother's habit because it was the only language we knew for pain. Caleb stood near the back door, face pale. Vanessa whispered to him urgently, already calculating damage control, already planning what to say to the press, to donors, to friends. Nina packed her papers carefully, not triumphant, not cruel, just done. I stayed, because the restaurant had been my whole life. And now it felt like a house after an earthquake, still standing, but changed in ways you can't unsee. Around dawn, I sat alone in the dining room. The chairs were flipped on tables, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and grief. I opened my laptop and stared at an email draft titled Re-Property Sale Inquiry. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. One click could end the story, or begin a different one. I thought about my mother's laugh, my father's tired eyes, Sophia's quiet loyalty, Nina's steady courage. I thought about the thin receipt, not a weapon, a reminder. I didn't send the email, not yet. Outside, the sun climbed slowly, indifferent and bright, and I realized some endings aren't endings. They're choices you have to make again every day.